From the Center for Western Priorities, this is The Landscape, your show about the outdoors and America's public lands. I'm Aaron Weiss, outside at Bear Creek Lake Park, one of the crown jewels of the regional park system here in the Denver area. We've got the second part of our interview with public lands photographer Bob Wick coming up this week. Just like last week, this episode is also on video, so you can see the photos that we're talking about. Links to this episode are on Facebook and YouTube in the show notes, along with links to all the photos that you're going to hear us reference. If you haven't yet listened to part one of our conversation with Bob, go back and do that right now. We cover his career as a wilderness specialist, also how he basically fell into the role of photographer that was unofficial all of these years. And then we talked about some of the most meaningful photos that he has taken over his 30-plus years with the Bureau of Land Management. So this episode is a sort of bonus because I am such a fan of Bob's work, and I was curious about the mechanics of what goes into making such great photos, especially landscape work. He's just spectacular. So I am going to warn you on the front end that we get kind of technical in here. We're going to talk about gear, camera settings, lenses, all of that good stuff if you are a weekend photographer like me. If that is not your thing, don't sweat it. We'll be back to our regular public policy programming before you know it. So no news update in this episode. We're just going to dive right into part two with Bob. Enjoy. All right, back with Bob. Bob, thank you for sticking around for the bonus round here. Number one, just as a photographer myself who has spent many years admiring your work, tell me about your setup. What's your gear, generally speaking, and in particular, what lenses do you like to shoot with when you're out in the field?
I've always been a Canon person, mainly because the company's got really good at having lenses specific to cameras. So once you get with one brand, you sort of stick with them. But I've always liked Canon. Yeah, you're locked in, so to speak. And I have an EOS 5D Mark IV. That's a long name, but it's a full sensor, full frame sensor camera. I've always liked those. And my kind of walk around lens, if I'm just doing snapshots, is 24 to 70, or that range. 24 to 105. Mm-hmm. And then, but my main go-to lens is a 16 to 35, really wide angle lens, because I like to shoot those grand landscapes. So all those sunrise shots with really high depth of field are shot on a tripod with an f/16 f-stop, which gives you the starburst effect as a side benefit, but also gives you that really great depth of field, so you can just walk into the image. So I do less wildlife photography, but so I'm more in the wide angle range.
So you mentioned wildlife photography. You have shot some of the iconic photos of the sage grouse, which we didn't get to talk about during the first episode. Obviously, that is not with the 16 to 35. You must have been down low with some pretty significant glass to get those shots.
I was down low. I did not have significant glass. I got permission from the wildlife biologist and field manager in an office here in California to set up a tent as a blind on a lek. And my only promise was stay in the tent, do not get out of the tent until the birds are done strutting. So they just started flying in about 2 or 3 in the morning and sounding like coffee percolators. And I had to get serenaded by them for several hours before it got bright enough to shoot them. But yeah, I just had my lens poking out of the tent. They were several feet away from me at certain points and wouldn't pay attention at all. I didn't want them to, but I think I could have thrown rocks at them. They were so focused on trying to attract females. It was just probably my most amazing wildlife photo experience. One of my most amazing experiences ever. And it was fun to see those photos become like the poster photos for the sage grouse. They've been used quite a bit.
They are. They're the poster child for the bird. And so that was with like your 24-105, or did you go a
Yeah,
little
I probably used
bigger than
like a
that?
70 to 200 there, but I do remember there were a few
Okay.
times where I almost pulled back more. I was on the 70 end of
Hmm.
it a lot just because they were maybe, 5, 10 feet
So
away.
close.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Um, so then I obviously, so it sounds like number one, you don't shoot with primes very often, if at all.
I have a prime lens I use for night sky photos sometimes, but yeah, I
Okay.
I do use more zooms. There's a little drop in, sharpness sometimes, but for especially for web based use, it's
Yeah.
indiscernible um, to me anyway.
And and is that a function of trying to keep your weight down as you're in the field? Obviously, some of these shots are kind of in the middle of nowhere. You don't want to have to, pack a, giant 400 millimeter or some massive prime that's not going to end up being the right one.
Yeah, as earlier in my career, I'd pack 3 or 4 lenses up a mountain. Now it's like small tripod. Which lens am I going to take? So that's a function of getting out of shape. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I have to admit,
so yeah.
my 16 to 35, I'd say 99% of the images I shoot at 16 millimeters. So I probably could have a prime, but
All right. Well, let's go through some of these other amazing shots that you have sent with more an eye of how you get them. And starting with this basin and range in Nevada. This is clearly one of those F-16 because you've got the starburst coming off the
Mhm.
star. You have plants in front of you that look to be 2 or 3 feet in front of you, if that are totally in focus, as are the mountains all the way back. So walk us through that setup and your thought process as you're lining up to get this shot.
Well, it's one of those hilltop shots where, with a landscape shot, I always like to have a spot where someone's eye will lead into an image and can work its way through. So from the foreground through those grasses back to the mountains. I like to shoot backlighting where I can, where the sun's actually shining towards the camera, especially for vegetation, because as you can see, those grass plants are glowing just because the
Yeah,
sun's shining
they're
through
just
them.
lighting
So
up with the sun coming in. Yeah.
yeah, so the old adage of keep the sun behind your shoulder when you're photographing, I try to throw that out the window. I like side lighting or backlighting, even though you can get some squirrely things like little sun specters in your lens and stuff. I think it's worth the effort there. So yeah, and then the starburst, each lens is different, but if you use a very small f-stop, you'll get that starburst effect automatically. It's the mechanics of the camera.
And roughly how long an exposure do you end up shooting for that? I assume you're on a
That's
tripod
in
for something
pretty
like that.
bright sun, so that probably is maybe 15th of a second or something. But I always do use my
Okay.
tripod. And there are times where it's blowing pretty hard, and you're compromising on if you want to freeze some wildflowers in the foreground and still have enough light. I'll have to ramp up the ISO level to be able to shoot at a faster shutter speed, which used to be a problem because the higher the ISO, the more grainy your photo is. But now it's pretty amazing. You can shoot at 800, even
Right. No,
sometimes
you could go up
1600.
way high and yeah,
Yeah, so it's,
and yeah,
but I
almost
usually
almost
like,
no noise
yeah,
turning up.
slow and low is what I am with
Oh,
exposures. Yeah.
walk me through your Google Earth process. You mentioned that in our first interview there. How do you scope out folks? Are you basically in down low in the 3D mode, trying to almost frame it ahead of time?
Yeah, most of the time I'm in a situation where I'm going to be walking in cross country, because there are no trails in a lot of BLM lands. I usually am most careful for sunrise, sunset shots to have as many options as I can. So if I have like a knoll or at least a spot where I can photograph into the sun, photograph side lighting, and then photograph away from the sun, that's optimal. If I'm shooting in a canyon, that's often the more difficult. Like a north-south canyon at sunrise is difficult. You get shadow on one side and light on the other. So I'll use Google Earth to say, oh yeah, the river curves east-west for this segment. I could probably stage over in this area and get some better sunrise sunset shots. So it just allows me to explore lighting angles at different times of day and whether or not I can get somewhere too.
With some of those, sunrise, sunset, extreme dynamic range, do you ever shoot HDR multiple exposures and stitch them together later, or do you like to do just one shot?
I do a mix of both. I probably use HDR shots. I used them more in the past, but now the range is better with the newer cameras. But yeah, if I'm in a harsh lighting situation, just like I mentioned that canyon situation where half of it's in shadow, half of it's bright, I want to pull out some of the details in the shadow areas. So yeah, I will use HDR for that. I do a lot of post processing with HDR because I think you can get some really non-natural looking situations where you've removed too much shadow or it adds too much color saturation. So I'll try to pull that back in Lightroom to make it look as natural as possible. And I do manipulate all my photos. Photography is the only art that people get upset when you go in and do something other than snap the shutter. And I always remind them that Ansel Adams spent more time in the darkroom than he did snapping his shutter, and he used filters and everything else. I think where photography's gotten a bad name are people that use photo mosaics or really, overbake photos, and that's fine. That's their choice, but everyone thinks everything's been photoshopped, and I shoot raw files, which are very flat, and choose to be a chef and make my own adjustments versus taking what comes out of the camera.
Sure. And I point out to folks that the JPEG that comes out of your camera, someone made a choice as to what that was going to look like, and it was the programmers who programmed the JPEG algorithms to make it look that way. So you can decide to take that on yourself if you want. So yeah, you talk about filters. You've got this shot of an eclipse in Idaho. This is a solar eclipse, is that right?
That is, yeah. That was the one, what was that, 3 or 4 years ago that went from Oregon across the Rockies, yeah. And that's
Are you shooting through like welding glass or something on this? I mean, what to get it that dark?
There's no filter on that camera.
Wow.
It's what was interesting. I sort of stuck that photo in to say don't get too uptight about technology with photography, because with the eclipse, I had 3 or 4 minutes. It seemed like 3 or 4 seconds to take a bunch of photos. And there was so much hype about that eclipse. And there were all these photo nerds posting all these different camera settings. And I just got so overwhelmed with how am I going to get the perfect photos of this? I had 3 cameras set up, adjusting the 2 cameras that were right with me for every little nuance, stressing out about it. And this particular camera, I'd set back about 100 yards on full auto mode and just got it with that tree in the foreground. And it was the best picture I got. So don't stress too much.
How did you pick that spot? Because obviously you got the tree. Yeah, you got the tree. You've got some water on the shot. How did you scope it out? Because I do remember for that eclipse, folks were like picking out their spots, getting there plenty early to stake their claim. How did you make your decision about where to be for that eclipse?
Well, that was another place where I used a file on Google Earth which showed the midpoint of the eclipse, and they wanted me to do something in Idaho. So this was the only wilderness area, BLM wilderness area in Idaho, the eclipse path went through. So I went there. The eclipse was way above the horizon. So I looked around. This is one where I did scout it for 2 days. I was hoping to get like a cliff situation where I could zoom up and get the sun really big, but there just wasn't that landscape there. So with the sun that high in the sky, I use timeanddate.com, and there's a bunch of other sites out there that'll tell you the azimuth of the sun and the elevation. So I just knew that it would be in that spot at totality. And, I could have zoomed in right on the sun, but that shot could have been in Portland or, Pocatello. Nobody would know. So I needed to get that landscape in there. And the only way to do that was to have a teeny, teeny sun. So with a wide angle lens.
Another landscape shot that you sent over that I had not seen before is from Wyoming, and you call it Pony Express. You've got a rider on horseback, cowboy hat. I mean, iconic Western shot with a sunbreak coming through some very dark clouds. And you don't do a whole lot of shooting with people in it in your regular BLM work. How did this one come about? Did you know you were going to have a horse and rider to work with that day?
I did. I've been really lucky in that I've learned, especially when I'm out at sunrise, because nobody wants to get up at 4 a.m. to go out. I mean, you rarely will catch people randomly in the places I'm photographing. So I usually have employees or volunteers or, a mountain bike group or someone else come out when I want to do people photography, because it's just more, I can plan for that. So this is actually a young lady who was with the Pony Express re-ride group, and I was looking for a typical Pony Express rider and brown clothing, and the re-ride group has these big bright red vests on, and she was a young lady instead of a young guy who most of the riders were. So I'm like, how am I going to make this look authentic? And then this storm was brewing. So I started thinking, well, I need to come up with a way to make this look authentic. So we just worked it. So I got a silhouette shot, and just that foreboding storm cloud really, gives it the essence of what those riders went through. That's also a very nondescript landscape, and it's wide open sagebrush, not a lot of landscape features. So that's always a good tip when the landscape doesn't have a lot of dramatic features. Just work the sky as best you can, because I would give more for dramatic
or put a horse on it.
Yeah. So getting those dramatic skies.
Okay, let's dive into night photography, which I know is one of those things that folks really want to know how to do. And you have one of the iconic shots from Sonora Desert National Monument around where I grew up in Tucson. You have saguaros in silhouette with the Milky Way between them, and this is very wide because it looks like you got some hills off to the side. This could even be a fisheye lens. You've got some movement in the star trails out on the edges, so I'm assuming we must be looking pretty close to dead north on this. How did you set this one up? How long a shot, how long exposure did you end up taking, and how many tries did it take you to get this one the way you want it?
Well, there's all kinds of tutorials out there now on night sky photography. This was one of my earlier shots, but you basically have to ramp up your ISO. I think this was like 3200. The wider angle lenses can get slower shutter speed and still capture the stars as point of light. So in this case, I think with that particular lens, I can go up to about 20-second exposures before you get to, there are some star trails a little bit on the edge, but the Milky Way itself.
On the edges, yeah, but the center is pretty darn still. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also, one of the neat things is with the newer cameras, the sensor picks up more than your eye can see with the 20-second exposure. So you're always seeing more stars than the naked eye. And it's interesting you mentioned north, because the core of the Milky Way is always to the south of us. So that's a southern south
Oh,
southeastern exposure. And I kind of laugh at that because
okay.
I've seen some photos where I know the landscape where it'll show the Milky Way in a mountain range. And I know the person is looking true north and it's a photo mosaic because the Milky Way doesn't shine in the north like
Oh,
that.
they're
So,
inserting the Milky Way on
yeah.
a north-facing shot.
So
Oh, yeah.
you can always tell when somebody's buggering it up. But yeah, I love just being out at night. And I actually have a time lapse, a 4 hour time lapse of the Milky Way as it moves across the sky in this image. And I forgot my little interval timer. I was just going to go to sleep and let the timer do the work. But anyway, I stood there for 4 hours every 20 seconds pushing the shutter button. It was very zen-like.
Wow, that is dedication for 4 hours. You feel kind of like the guy from Lost in the cave at that point, don't you? Um,
Yeah.
having to hit enter. And then so this last one to talk about is Campbell Creek, Alaska, with a bunch of kids running to you in the snow, and this is some pretty serious heavy snow coming down as you would hope in Alaska. It looks like their parents are following along behind. How did this one come about? And well, yeah, just give me the story behind it because there is so much joy in this photo.
Yeah, it took me a while. I used to do almost exclusively landscapes, and then everyone starts saying, you need to get more people in your photos. So, in general, you'll notice my people photos, I'll have somebody standing looking out over a landscape to give the landscape priority. But in this case, the kids were the focus. So, I wanted them to be having fun and show the outdoors. They're having a good time. And one thing I've learned with kids is, never tell them to stand still. Give them something to do. And if you get them running, they're always going to smile. You don't have to tell them anything. Just set them up to run towards the camera. And in this case, it was great because there was a sheet of ice under that thin layer of snow. So those kids were going down like bowling pins every couple seconds, but they just bounce right back up and keep running and laugh even harder. So it was fun to be out there. I have a good time when I can get kids laughing. It's always makes for great photos. So make your kids run. I've had parents starting to scold their kids for being too ornery and to chill out. And I've said, no, we got to get them revved up so they can start laughing and having fun. So yeah, do that for family photos and you'll get some good ones.
With folks now taking more photos than ever, and thanks to phone cameras being as good as they are, folks are ending up with more pictures than ever before. Before you'd go on vacation and come back with a roll or two of film and have some 4x6s done. And now it's very easy to go on vacation for a week or two and come back with a couple hundred or in my case, a few thousand frames. What are your techniques for managing libraries, for sorting through, picking your best stuff out, and then safely storing them so they don't get lost or aren't at risk of data loss?
Yeah, I'm not the best organizer in the world, but I've managed to do it just out of necessity. And with me, I don't work for Adobe, but I swear by Adobe Lightroom. It's made for photographers. You can edit large numbers of images very easily. It has a database built into it, so you can keyword images and give them flags and higher ratings if they're better images. So I'll use that. I'll upload my images and flag the good ones early on, and rarely look at my other images, but I don't delete them. So I actually, getting ready for retirement, I was digging through my images. I had over 200,000 images, and I boiled them down to about 12,000 that I'm going to send in to folks to be able to use. But it would have taken years to do that without Lightroom, but I was just able to do that. But yeah, most of the other images are like multiple exposures, bracketing, things like that. And the only reason I save them is there's always that time that somebody will kick themselves saying, boy, I wish I would have had a slightly different angle or something. And data space is free. And as long as you don't have to sort through it, doesn't hurt to have them on file.
I would hope that someone at BLM or Interior has flagged the Library of Congress or the Smithsonian, because it seems like there really ought to be a Bob Wick collection that goes online at some point to document your remarkable career and everything you have done for public land. So if someone hasn't already made that suggestion to them or to the library, I'm going to do that next, because knowing that that's out there, that is something that should not just vanish and sit on a shelf somewhere on some stored hard drives. The world ought to be able to see that and enjoy that. So that is just fabulous, knowing that that's out there and will be a resource for the country going forward. I feel like we don't even have time to get into Lightroom and your processing techniques and your approaches to that. So I think I'm going to let that go for now and just say that if you ever decide to start giving classes on the Bob Wick approach to processing, I will be the first one to sign up and learn from you, because I very much appreciate how your style is both dramatic but not over the top in a way that you often see from outdoor photography. It is both natural and vivid, but not over the top, which I really love. Any final advice that you give to folks when people ask you, hey, how do I take Bob Wick photos? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I don't want to sound self-deprecating, but I'm not the best photographer. I just have made it a point to go out to places that a lot of people haven't photographed and gotten new angles. And that's the art of photography, the craft and the technical skill. There's 3 components of it. And you could put me with 20 people in Yosemite Valley and I wouldn't get anything better than them. But so I would just say, practice your passion, learn the techniques, and come up with your own theme and your own way of doing things, so that you can do something new and not follow everybody to the same overlook to try to get the same photograph. Just be unique. That would be my big thing.
And I mean, what's the say? 90% of photography is knowing where to stand. I forget who said that, but I guess you're living proof of that, because you figure out where to stand.
Yeah, and one of my coworkers gave me the quote Louis Pasteur came out with the chance favors the prepared mind. And I've always had people say, boy, you're always in the right place at the right time. And that's amazing. And it's like, well, that took a lot of planning and there was some luck involved, and the sun may not have set that way, but I was ready for it when it happened, and you can be too. So be prepared.
Well, Bob, thank you for taking this extra time to photo geek out with me. I really appreciate it, and I know that everyone who enjoys your photos will enjoy this as well. So thank you again, and congratulations. Enjoy your retirement.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me on.
All right, back outside here at Bear Creek Lake Park. That was, of course, Ansel Adams, who said a good photograph is knowing where to stand. I should have known that. In case you couldn't tell, that conversation was a real treat for me. After we recorded it, the Bureau of Land Management gave Bob a wonderful send-off as well, recognizing the contribution that he made to the way all Americans know and recognize and appreciate our public lands. That will do it for this episode. I'm off for a couple weeks of travel, so we will be back later in August, hopefully with some news to talk about, with all the stuff we've been waiting on this summer, especially that oil and gas leasing report, and hopefully the Bureau of Land Management will have a Senate-confirmed director by then as well. In the meantime, go grab your camera, let Bob Wick or Ansel Adams inspire you, get outside, figure out where you want to stand. I'm Aaron Weiss. On behalf of the whole Center for Western Priorities team, thank you for listening to The Landscape.